The telegram arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in October of 1883, and it changed everything about Amelia Voss's life in ways she could never have imagined. Standing there in the dusty parlor of her family's failing ranch while her father read the words that would seal her fate. She had known things were bad. The drought had strangled their land for 3 consecutive seasons, turning the grasslands brown and brittle, and the cattle had died one by one until only a handful remained. Her father had borrowed money from Marcus Hendricks, the wealthiest man in Corrian, Nevada, a man whose generosity came with strings attached like a spider's web. When the debt came due, and her father couldn't pay, Hendricks had offered a solution that made Amelia's blood run cold. He would forgive the entire debt, all $800 of it, if Amelia would become his wife. His 4th wife, to be precise, as the other 3 had all died under mysterious circumstances that the town whispered about but never investigated. "No," Amelia had said, her voice trembling but firm. "I won't do it, Father. I won't marry that man." Her father, Thomas Voss, had looked at her with eyes that held equal parts desperation and shame. Her mother had died 2 years prior from consumption, leaving Amelia to care for her younger siblings, 10-year-old twins named Samuel and Sarah. They watched now from the doorway, their faces pale and frightened. "You don't have a choice," Thomas had said quietly. "If we don't pay, Hendricks will take everything. The ranch, the house, everything. We'll have nothing. Your brother and sister will starve." "There has to be another way," Amelia had pleaded, but she could see in her father's face that he had already made his decision. That was how she found herself 3 days later, standing in Hendricks's ostentatious mansion on the outskirts of Corrian, wearing a simple cotton dress that had been her mother's, waiting to be sold like a piece of livestock. The house smelled of cigar smoke and something else, something darker that made her stomach turn. Hendricks was 63 years old, with thin gray hair and eyes that looked at her like she was a piece of meat. He had insisted on inspecting his purchase before finalizing the arrangement, walking around her in slow circles while her father stood in the corner, unable to meet her gaze. "She'll do," Hendricks had said finally, reaching out to touch her hair. Amelia had jerked away instinctively, and his expression had hardened. "She'll need to learn obedience, but I can teach her that." The transaction was completed with papers signed in Hendricks's study. Amelia would become his wife in 1 week's time, and the debt would be forgiven. She would live in this house, submit to his authority, and bear his children if God willed it. The thought made her physically ill. Her father left without saying goodbye. She watched from the window as his wagon disappeared down the road, taking with it any last shred of hope she had harbored that he might change his mind. She was alone now, trapped in this house with servants who wouldn't meet her eyes and a man who looked at her like a possession he had acquired. That night, lying in the bedroom Hendricks had assigned her until the wedding, Amelia made a decision. She would not marry this man. She would not spend her life as another one of his victims, another wife who died under suspicious circumstances. She would run. She waited until the house was silent, until well past midnight, when even the servants had retired. She had secreted away a small bundle of her belongings, a change of clothes and the few precious items she owned, including her mother's wedding ring. She climbed out the window, dropping silently into the garden below, and made her way to the stables. She couldn't take a horse, as that would be theft, but she could walk. Corrian was a small town, but the railroad ran through it, and if she could make it to the station, she could perhaps barter passage somewhere, anywhere else. The night was cold, the October air biting through her thin shawl. She walked quickly through the darkened streets, keeping to the shadows. The train station was on the far side of town, past the saloons and the general store, past the sheriff's office where a light still burned. She kept her head down and kept walking. She had almost made it when she heard the shout behind her. "There! That's Hendricks's girl," she ran. Her skirts tangled around her legs and her lungs burned, but she ran with everything she had. Behind her, she could hear footsteps, men's voices calling out for her to stop. They were gaining on her. She would never make it to the train station. Then, out of the darkness, a figure on horseback appeared. The horse was a massive bay stallion, and the rider was silhouetted against the moonlight. He brought the horse to a stop directly in her path, and for a moment, Amelia thought he was one of Hendricks's men. But then he reached down, extending his hand. "You running from something or toward something?" he asked. His voice was deep and calm with a slight drawl that marked him as a Southerner. "From," Amelia gasped, looking back at her pursuers. They were only 100 yards away now. "Good enough for me," the rider said. "Get on." She didn't hesitate. She grabbed his hand and he pulled her up behind him with surprising strength. She barely had time to settle onto the horse's back before he spurred it forward, and they were galloping away into the night. She wrapped her arms around his waist and held on tightly, feeling the powerful muscles of the horse beneath them as they raced away from Carlin. They rode for what felt like hours, though it was probably less. The rider seemed to know the terrain well, guiding the horse through paths that were barely visible in the darkness. Finally, when the lights of Carlin were long behind them and the first hints of dawn were touching the eastern horizon, he slowed the horse to a walk and then to a stop. They were in a small canyon, sheltered on 3 sides by rock walls. There was a stream running through it and a few scraggly trees. The rider dismounted first, then helped Amelia down. Her legs were shaking from the ride and from the terror of the night. "Thank you," she managed to say. "Thank you for helping me." He looked at her properly for the first time in the growing light. He was tall, probably in his mid-20s, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes that were a startling blue. He wore the clothes of a working cowboy, worn denim pants, a dark shirt, a leather vest, and a hat that had seen better days. A gun belt hung low on his hips, and she could see the well-worn handle of a Colt revolver. "Name's Bennett Irons," he said, tipping his hat slightly. "And you are?" "Amelia Voss," she replied, and then, because the fear and exhaustion and horror of the past few days suddenly overwhelmed her, she started to cry. "My family sold me for debts," she sobbed, covering her face with her hands. "They sold me to Marcus Hendricks to pay off what they owed. Like I was nothing, like I was just property." She expected judgment or perhaps indifference. Instead, she felt gentle hands on her shoulders, and when she looked up through her tears, Bennett Irons was looking at her with an expression of such fierce protectiveness that it took her breath away. "Then you're priceless to me," he said softly. "Because anyone who'd sell a person for money doesn't understand the first thing about value. You're safe now, Miss Voss. I give you my word on that." Amelia wiped her eyes, trying to compose herself. "You don't even know me. Why would you help me?" Bennett was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. "My sister," he said finally. "She was in a situation not unlike yours years ago. Different circumstances, but the same kind of trap. I wasn't there to help her then. I was off chasing cattle and glory and didn't come home until it was too late. She's gone now, so when I see someone who needs help, I don't ask questions. I just help." The grief in his voice was raw and real, and Amelia felt a pang of sympathy despite her own troubles. "I'm sorry about your sister." "Me too," Bennett said. He cleared his throat, visibly shaking off the memories. "But right now, we need to figure out what to do with you. Hendricks is a powerful man. He'll have men out looking for you by now. Can't take you back to Carlin, that's for certain." "I have nowhere to go," Amelia admitted. The reality of her situation was beginning to sink in. She had run away, but to what? She had no money, no prospects, no family who would take her back. Her father had made his choice. "Well," Bennett said, a small smile crossing his face, "I might have a solution to that. I'm headed up to a ranch about 40 miles north of here, near the Ruby Mountains. Owner's a friend of mine, man named Jack Corrigan. He's always looking for help, and his wife runs the household. They might have work for you if you're willing." "What kind of work?" Amelia asked warily. "Honest work," Bennett assured her. "Cooking, cleaning, helping with the ranch hands' meals. It's hard work, but Jack and his wife Margaret are good people. They'll treat you fair, and more importantly, they don't care much for Marcus Hendricks. They won't send you back." It wasn't much, but it was more than Amelia had right now. She nodded. "All right. Thank you, Mr. Irons." "Just Bennett," he said. "And we should get moving. I want to put more distance between us and Carlin before full daylight." They traveled north through the Nevada desert, following trails that Bennett seemed to know by instinct. The landscape was harsh and beautiful, all red rock and sage brush, with mountains rising in the distance. Bennett's horse, whose name was Thunder, carried them both with patient strength. They stopped occasionally to rest and water the horse, and Bennett shared his provisions with Amelia. Jerky, hardtack, and water from his canteen. As they rode, they talked. Bennett told her about his life, how he had grown up on a small ranch in Texas, how he had left home at 17 to work cattle drives and ranch jobs across the West. He spoke of the places he had seen, the people he had met, the hard lessons he had learned. He was 26 years old, he told her, and had been on his own for most of the past 9 years. Amelia told him about her life too, about growing up on the ranch outside Carlin, about her mother's death and her father's slow descent into desperation. She told him about her siblings and the pain of leaving them behind cut deep as she spoke. "I hope they'll be all right," she said quietly. "Samuel and Sarah, they're only 10. They need someone to look after them." "Your father will have to step up now," Bennett said. "Sometimes a man doesn't realize what he's got until he's lost it. Maybe losing you will wake him up." Amelia wasn't so sure, but she wanted to believe it. They reached the Corrigan ranch on the evening of the second day. It was larger than Amelia had expected. A sprawling operation with a big ranch house, multiple barns and corrals full of horses and cattle. As they rode up the main path, several ranch hands looked up from their work, watching with curiosity. Bennett took them straight to the main house, where a man in his 50s was sitting on the porch, smoking a pipe. He stood when he saw them, a broad smile crossing his weathered face. "Bennett Irons," he called out. "About time you showed up. I was beginning to think you'd found better prospects elsewhere." "Not a chance, Jack," Bennett said, dismounting and helping Amelia down. "I brought someone with me. This is Miss Amelia Voss. She's in need of work and a safe place to stay. I was hoping you and Margaret might have a place for her." Jack Corrigan looked at Amelia with shrewd but kind eyes. "Running from trouble?" "Yes, sir," Amelia said honestly. "But I'm a hard worker, and I won't bring that trouble to your door if I can help it." "What kind of trouble?" Jack asked. Bennett explained the situation in brief, matter-of-fact terms. Jack's expression darkened when he heard Hendricks's name. "That snake," he muttered. "I've heard stories about him. Lost 3 wives in 5 years, hasn't he?" "4 wives," Amelia corrected quietly. "I was meant to be the 4th. Jack nodded slowly. "Well, you won't be going back there, that's certain. Come on inside. Let's talk to Margaret." Margaret Corrigan was a plump, warm woman with graying hair and a smile that lit up her whole face. When she heard Amelia's story, she immediately took the younger woman under her wing. "You poor dear," she said, pulling Amelia into a hug. "Of course you can stay here. We always need help with the cooking and the housework, and Lord knows these ranch hands eat like they've got hollow legs." "Can you cook?" "Yes, madam," Amelia said. "My mother taught me before she passed." "Good, good," Margaret said. She turned to her husband. "Jack, get one of the boys to take Miss Voss's things to the spare room off the kitchen. She'll stay there." Then to Amelia, "It's not fancy, but it's clean and warm, and it's yours. You'll earn your keep, but we'll treat you fair. Wages are $2 a week plus room and board." It was more than fair. It was generous. Amelia felt tears prick her eyes again. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." That night, after a hot meal and a wash, Amelia lay in her small room and felt safe for the first time in weeks. She could hear the sounds of the ranch outside her window. Horses whickering, men's voices calling good night to each other, the wind rustling through the cottonwood trees. It was peaceful, and somewhere in the bunkhouse, Bennett Irons was settling in to start his new job as well. Amelia found herself thinking about him, about the kindness he had shown her, about the sadness in his eyes when he spoke of his sister. He had saved her life, and she didn't even know how to properly thank him. The days settled into a rhythm. Amelia woke before dawn each morning to help Margaret prepare breakfast for the ranch hands. There were usually 15 to 20 men working on the ranch at any given time, and they ate prodigious amounts of food. Amelia learned to make enormous batches of biscuits, to fry bacon and eggs by the dozen, to make coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in. After breakfast was cleaned up, there was laundry to do, or bread to bake, or vegetables to prepare for the midday meal. The work was hard and constant, but Amelia found that she didn't mind. It kept her hands busy and her mind occupied, and Margaret was kind and patient as a teacher. Bennett worked with the other ranch hands, mostly with the horses. He had a gift with them, Amelia noticed. She would see him in the corrals sometimes, working with a skittish young colt or a stubborn mare, and his patience and gentleness always won them over. He was well liked by the other men, too, always ready with a joke or a helping hand. But he was also clearly a man who kept his own counsel, who had depths that he didn't share easily. They saw each other often, of course. He ate with the other ranch hands, and she served the meals. Sometimes they would talk briefly, exchanging pleasantries about the weather or the work. But there was something else there, too, something unspoken that hung in the air between them. Amelia found herself looking for him throughout the day, feeling a little flutter in her chest when she spotted him. She told herself it was just gratitude, just the natural warmth anyone would feel toward their rescuer. But she knew, deep down, that it was more than that. It was Bennett who sought her out one evening, about 3 weeks after they had arrived at the ranch. Amelia was sitting on the porch of the main house, shelling peas for the next day's meal. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, and the air had the cool bite of approaching winter. "Evening, Miss Voss," Bennett said, climbing the steps to the porch. "Mind if I join you? Please do," Amelia said, gesturing to the empty chair beside her. "And please call me Amelia. I think you've earned that right." Bennett sat, removing his hat and setting it on his knee. He was silent for a moment, just watching the sunset. Then he said, "I wanted to check on you, make sure you're settling in all right." "I am," Amelia assured him. "The Corrigans are wonderful people. I feel very fortunate." "Good," Bennett said. He hesitated, then added, "I also wanted to say that I'm sorry. About your family, about everything you've been through. It's not right what they did to you." Amelia's hand stilled on the peas. "I've been trying not to think about it too much," she admitted. "It hurts less that way, but I do wonder about my brother and sister. I hope they're all right." "You could write to them," Bennett suggested. "If you wanted to, I could post a letter for you next time I go into town." "I don't know if that's wise," Amelia said. If my father knew where I was, he might tell Hendricks, and then all of this, everything you did to help me, would be for nothing." "Hendricks's reach doesn't extend this far," Bennett said with certainty. "Jack Corrigan is well respected in these parts, and he's got friends who wouldn't take kindly to someone like Hendricks causing trouble. You're safe here, Amelia, I promise you that." The way he said her name, soft and genuine, made something warm bloom in her chest. She looked at him, really looked at him in the fading light. He was handsome, she realized, but it was more than that. There was a goodness in him, a core of decency that showed in everything he did. "Why did you really help me that night?" she asked suddenly. "I know you said it was because of your sister, but there's more to it than that, isn't there?" Bennett was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low and thoughtful. "My sister's name was Caroline," he said. "She was younger than me by 3 years. Prettiest girl in the county, everyone said so. When I left home, she was only 14, just a kid. I was chasing dreams, wanted to make my fortune, see the world. I wrote to her when I could, but it wasn't often enough. I didn't come home for 5 years. He paused, his jaw tightening. When I finally did come back, I found out that our father had promised her to a man named William Crenshaw. He was 45 years old, a widower with a mean streak. Caroline didn't want to marry him, but our father needed the money. Crenshaw had bought up our father's debts, just like Hendricks did to yours. So Caroline married him, because she thought she had to." Amelia could guess where this story was going, but she didn't interrupt. "She lasted 2 years, Bennett continued, his voice rough with suppressed emotion. "Crenshaw was cruel to her, beat her from what I heard later. She got pregnant and lost the baby, got pregnant again and lost that one too. The 3rd time she died in childbirth. The baby died too. She was only 21 years old." "Oh, Bennett," Amelia breathed, reaching out to touch his hand. "I'm so sorry." "I wasn't there," Bennett said. "I was off working a ranch in Colorado, thought I had plenty of time to come home for a visit. By the time I got word that she was sick, she was already gone. I didn't even make it back for the funeral." He looked at Amelia, and his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "So when I saw you that night, running scared through the streets, I saw Caroline. I saw a chance to do for you what I couldn't do for her. That's why I helped you. That's why I'll keep helping you for as long as you need it." Amelia felt her own tears spilling over. Without thinking, she moved closer and wrapped her arms around Bennett in a hug. He stiffened for just a moment, then returned the embrace, holding her carefully as though she might break. They stayed like that for a long moment, 2 people who had both known loss and were finding comfort in each other. When they finally pulled apart, Bennett cleared his throat awkwardly. "Sorry," he said. "Didn't mean to unload all that on you." "Don't apologize," Amelia said firmly. "I asked, and I'm glad you told me. Your sister was lucky to have a brother who loved her so much." "Not lucky enough," Bennett said bitterly. "Love isn't measured by outcomes," Amelia said softly. "It's measured by the caring, by the effort. You loved her. That matters." Bennett looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Then he smiled just a little. "You're wise for your years, Amelia Voss. How old are you anyway? I realized I never asked." 22, Amelia said. 23 in December, and you're 26, you said." "That's right," Bennett confirmed. 27 come February." "We're practically ancient," Amelia said with a small laugh, trying to lighten the mood. It worked. Bennett chuckled. "Speak for yourself." "I've got plenty of good years left in me." They talked until full dark about everything and nothing. About their childhoods, about their dreams, about the books they had read, and the places they wanted to see. Amelia found herself more at ease with Bennett than she had been with anyone in a long time. There was no judgment in him, no expectation. He simply listened and shared and made her feel valued. From that evening on, they spent more time together. Bennett would find excuses to come to the main house in the evenings, offering to help with small repairs or to chop firewood. Amelia would linger after the other ranch hands had left the dining hall, helping Bennett with whatever task he claimed to need assistance with. They were always careful to maintain propriety. Margaret Corrigan kept a watchful eye, and neither of them wanted to damage Amelia's reputation. But everyone on the ranch could see the way they gravitated toward each other, the way they lit up when the other entered the room. Jack Corrigan mentioned it to Bennett one day while they were mending fence. "You're sweet on Miss Voss," he said bluntly. "Don't bother denying it. Everyone can see it." Bennett hammered a nail with more force than necessary. "Is that a problem?" "Not necessarily," Jack said. "But you should be careful. That girl's been through hell. The last thing she needs is to get her heart broken." "I wouldn't do that to her," Bennett said firmly. "Not intentionally, maybe," Jack agreed. "But you're a cowboy, Bennett. You've been drifting from job to job since you were 17. Are you really ready to settle down? Because that's what Amelia needs. She needs stability, security, a home." Bennett was quiet, thinking. "Maybe I'm ready for that," he said finally. "Maybe I've been drifting because I was looking for something, and maybe I've found it." Jack studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Well, if you're serious about her, you'd best do right by her, court her proper. And when the time comes, you ask her father's permission, or at least write to him. I know what he did was wrong, but she'll want things done right." Bennett wasn't so sure about that last part, but he took Jack's advice to heart. That evening, he approached Amelia after dinner and asked if he could court her officially. She had been scrubbing a pot, and she nearly dropped it in surprise. "Court me," she repeated. "You mean like with intentions?" "Yes," Bennett said, suddenly nervous. "Honorable intentions. I know we haven't known each other long, but I care about you, Amelia. I'd like the chance to see if this, whatever this is between us, could be something more, something lasting." Amelia set down the pot, wiping her hands on her apron. Her heart was racing. "I care about you too," she admitted. "But Bennett, I'm not free. Legally, I'm still supposed to marry Marcus Hendricks. The contract my father signed, it was a legal document. If Hendricks wanted to, he could come here and force me to go back with him." "Let him try," Bennett said, his jaw setting in a stubborn line. "He'd have to go through me first." "I don't want you getting hurt because of me," Amelia said, though the fierce protectiveness in his voice made her feel warm all over. "Too late for that," Bennett said with a wry smile. "I'm already in too deep, and as for the legal stuff, we'll figure it out. Maybe there's a way to break that contract. Maybe we can talk to a lawyer, but I don't want to wait for all that to be sorted out before I start courting you proper. Life's too short and too uncertain. I learned that when I lost Caroline." Amelia looked at him, this good man who had appeared out of nowhere to save her, who had shown her nothing but kindness and respect. "All right," she said softly. "Yes, I would like that very much." Bennett's face broke into a wide grin. Yeah, Amelia confirmed, smiling back at him. He took her hand, his rough, calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "I'll do this right," he promised. "I'll make you happy, Amelia, I swear it." "You already do," she said. Their courtship was the talk of the ranch, though everyone was supportive. Margaret Corrigan was particularly pleased, as she had been hoping for exactly this outcome since the day they had arrived. "I knew it," she kept saying. "I knew from the moment I saw you two together." Bennett courted Amelia the old-fashioned way. He brought her wildflowers from the range. He sat with her in the evenings and read to her from the books in the Corrigan small library. He taught her to ride properly, spending patient hours helping her get comfortable on one of the gentler mares. They went on chaperone picnics, with Margaret or one of the other ranch wives tagging along at a discreet distance. He never pushed for more than she was ready to give, never made her feel pressured or rushed. And slowly, As the weeks turned into months, Amelia found herself falling in love. It wasn't the dramatic, overwhelming passion of the dime novels she had read as a girl. It was quieter than that, steadier. It was in the way Bennett remembered how she took her coffee. It was in the way he listened when she talked about her mother or her worries about her siblings. It was in the way he looked at her, like she was the most precious thing in his world. Winter came to the Ruby Mountains, bringing snow and cold winds. The ranch work slowed somewhat, though there were still animals to tend and repairs to make. Bennett and Amelia spent more time indoors, sitting by the fire in the main house, talking about their future. They both knew that eventually they would have to deal with the Hendricks situation. It hung over them like a dark cloud, a reminder that Amelia wasn't truly free. It was Jack Corrigan who finally took action. In early December, he rode into the nearest town with a proper lawyer's office and explained the situation. The lawyer, a stern man named Amos Fletcher, listened carefully and then asked to see the contract that Thomas Voss had signed. Of course, they didn't have it, but Fletcher said he would make inquiries. He sent telegrams and letters, and 3 weeks later he had news. He rode out to the Corrigan ranch himself to deliver it. They gathered in the Corrigan's parlor, Jack and Margaret, Bennett and Amelia, and Mr. Fletcher with his leather satchel full of papers. "I've looked into your case, Miss Voss," he said without preamble, "and I have good news and bad news. The bad news is that the contract your father signed is, technically, legal. You are betrothed to Marcus Hendricks by written agreement." Amelia's heart sank. Beside her, Bennett's hand tightened on hers. "However," Fletcher continued, "there are some very interesting details that work in your favor. First, you never signed the contract yourself. Your father signed on your behalf, but Nevada law requires that a woman of legal age must consent to her own marriage. Since you are 22 years old, your father could not legally contract you into marriage without your consent. So the contract is void?" Bennett asked hopefully. "Not quite," Fletcher said. "Hendricks could argue that you gave implicit consent by living in his house before the wedding date. But there's another problem for him. It turns out that Marcus Hendricks is currently under investigation by the territorial marshal for fraud and embezzlement. Several people have come forward with complaints about his business practices. If he presses his claim on you, Miss Voss, I can almost guarantee that the case would be thrown out, especially given the cloud of suspicion currently hanging over him." "What are you saying?" Amelia asked, almost afraid to hope. "I'm saying that if you don't want to marry Marcus Hendricks, you don't have to," Fletcher said. "I'll file papers declaring the contract void due to lack of consent. If Hendricks wants to fight it, he can, but I don't think he will. He has bigger problems right now, and the last thing he needs is a legal battle that will bring even more scrutiny to his affairs." Amelia felt tears streaming down her face, but for the first time in months, they were tears of joy. "I'm free." "You're free," Fletcher confirmed. Bennett pulled her into his arms and she buried her face against his chest, sobbing with relief. She felt his lips press against the top of her head, felt his arms strong and safe around her. "You're free," he murmured. "You're free, Amelia." The papers were filed, and true to Fletcher's prediction, Hendricks did not contest them. In fact, according to the lawyer's sources, Hendricks had bigger problems. The marshal's investigation had uncovered significant evidence of his crimes, and by February, he had been arrested. His trial was scheduled for the spring, and the general consensus was that he would hang or spend the rest of his life in prison. With that threat finally removed, Amelia felt like she could breathe properly for the first time in nearly a year. She wrote to her father, a brief letter informing him that she was safe and well, and that the contract with Hendricks had been dissolved. She also wrote to the neighbors who lived near her father's ranch, asking them to check on Samuel and Sarah, and to let her know if they needed anything. The responses she received were reassuring. Her father had, apparently, taken Jack Corrigan's prediction to heart. Losing Amelia had been a wake-up call, and he was working hard to rebuild the ranch and be a better father to the twins. It wasn't enough to make Amelia forgive him, not yet, but it was a start. In March of 1884, on a clear, cool day with the first hints of spring in the air, Bennett Irons proposed to Amelia Voss. He did it simply, in the place where they had first really talked, on the porch of the Corrigan ranch house, with the sunset painting the sky in brilliant colors. He didn't have a ring, not yet, but he had his heart in his hands as he knelt before her. "Amelia," he said, "you know I'm not a man of many words. I'm not fancy or educated. I'm just a cowboy who spent most of his life drifting from place to place. But when I found you, when I pulled you up onto my horse that night, I found the place I was meant to be. You're my home, Amelia. You're what I've been searching for. Will you marry me? Will you be my wife and let me spend the rest of my life making you happy?" Amelia didn't even have to think about it. "Yes," she said, pulling him up and into her arms. "Yes, Bennett, 1,000 times yes." They were married in April, in a simple ceremony in the nearby town of Elko. Margaret Corrigan stood up as Amelia's matron of honor, and Jack was Bennett's best man. The whole ranch turned out for the wedding, along with what seemed like half the county. Amelia wore a dress that Margaret had helped her sew, a beautiful cream-colored gown with lace at the collar and cuffs. Bennett wore a new suit, his hair freshly cut and his jaw clean-shaven. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and Bennett kissed her for the first time as her husband, Amelia felt a happiness so complete it was almost overwhelming. They had a small reception at the Corrigan ranch, with food and dancing and toasts to the happy couple. As the evening wound down and the stars came out, Bennett took Amelia's hand and led her away from the crowd, toward the small cabin that Jack had helped him build over the winter. It was on the edge of the ranch property, a simple 2-room structure with a wood stove and a loft, but it was theirs. Their home. "Welcome home, Mrs. Irons," Bennett said, lifting her over the threshold as tradition demanded. Amelia laughed, the sound bright and free. "I never thought I'd be this happy," she confessed. "6 months ago I thought my life was over, and now look at me. I have a husband I love, a home, a future. It's more than I ever dreamed possible." "We're going to have a good life," Bennett promised, setting her down gently. "I'm going to work hard and we're going to build something together. Maybe in a few years we can buy our own ranch. Raise horses, raise kids. Whatever you want, Amelia, I'm going to make it happen." Amelia reached up to cup his face in her hands. "I don't need a big ranch or a fortune," she said. "I just need you. You're all I want, Bennett." He kissed her then, and the kiss deepened into something more. They were husband and wife now, and the night ahead was theirs. Bennett was gentle with her, mindful that this was all new and perhaps frightening. But Amelia wasn't afraid. She trusted him completely, loved him with her whole heart. And as they came together for the first time, she felt a rightness, a sense of completion that she had never known before. The months that followed were the happiest of Amelia's life. She continued to help Margaret with the ranch household work. But now she also kept her own home, cooking meals for Bennett and keeping their little cabin clean and welcoming. Bennett worked long days with the horses and cattle, but he always came home to her in the evenings, and they would sit together by the fire, talking about their day, making plans for the future. In the fall of 1884, Amelia discovered she was pregnant. She told Bennett one evening after dinner, nervous about his reaction but also thrilled. He stared at her for a long moment, and then a grin spread across his face so wide she thought it might split him in two. "A baby," he said. "We're going to have a baby." "Yes," Amelia confirmed, laughing at his expression. "In the spring, I think. April or May." Bennett picked her up and spun her around, then immediately set her down with a panicked expression. "Sorry, I shouldn't have done that. Are you all right? Do you need to sit down? Should you be resting?" "Bennett, I'm fine," Amelia assured him, still laughing. "Pregnancy isn't an illness, but yes, I should probably take it a bit easier than usual." "I'll talk to Jack tomorrow," Bennett said immediately. "You're not working yourself to exhaustion. We'll figure something out." Jack and Margaret were delighted by the news, and they immediately rearranged the work schedule so that Amelia wouldn't be overburdened. She continued to help with lighter tasks, but the heavy work was taken on by others. As winter set in and Amelia's belly began to swell, Bennett became increasingly protective and worried. He hovered constantly, making sure she was warm enough, making sure she was eating enough, driving her slightly crazy with his concern until she finally had to tell him to calm down. "Women have been having babies since the dawn of time," she said, exasperated but touched by his worry. "I promise I'll be fine." "I can't lose you," Bennett said quietly. "I can't go through that again, Amelia. The thought of something happening to you, it terrifies me." Amelia understood then. He was thinking of Caroline, of his sister who had died in childbirth. She took his hand and placed it on her belly where the baby was moving. "Feel that," she said. "That's our child, strong and healthy, and I'm strong and healthy too. I'm not going anywhere, Bennett, I promise." The baby came in late April of 1885, arriving after a long and difficult labor that left Amelia exhausted but triumphant. It was a boy. A healthy, red-faced baby with a strong set of lungs and a shock of dark hair. Bennett cried when he held his son for the first time, tears of joy and relief streaming down his face. "He's perfect," he whispered, staring down at the tiny infant in his arms. "He's absolutely perfect." They named him James Thomas Irons, James after Bennett's grandfather and Thomas after Amelia's father. It was Amelia's way of extending an olive branch, of acknowledging that, despite everything, her father was still her father. She had been exchanging letters with him over the past year, careful letters that didn't say much, but kept the lines of communication open. She had also been sending small amounts of money when she could spare it, to help with Samuel and Sarah's care. The relationship was strained and might never be fully repaired, but it existed, and that was something. Motherhood transformed Amelia in ways she hadn't expected. She had always been responsible, always been the one to take care of others, but this was different. This tiny person depended on her completely, and the fierce love she felt for him was overwhelming. Bennett was a devoted father, helping with the baby whenever he could, getting up in the night to walk with James when he was fussy, making silly faces to coax out smiles. They settled into their new life as a family. The little cabin felt even more like a home now, with James's cradle by the bed and his tiny clothes hanging on a line to dry. Amelia found that she was content in a way she had never been before. The fear and uncertainty of her early life seemed like a distant memory, replaced by this steady, quiet happiness. The years passed peacefully. James grew into an energetic toddler, then a curious little boy. In 1887, Amelia gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Caroline Rose in honor of Bennett's sister. Bennett held his daughter and wept again, though these tears were bittersweet. "I wish Caroline could have met her namesake," he said. "She would have loved her." "I think she knows," Amelia said softly. "I think she's watching over all of us." In 1889, when Jack Corrigan announced that he was ready to retire and sell the ranch, Bennett and Amelia made a bold decision. They had been saving money carefully for years, and with a loan from the bank and some help from Jack himself, they bought a section of the ranch land. 200 acres with water rights and good grazing. It was enough to start their own operation, to build the future they had dreamed about. They built a new house, bigger than the cabin, with 3 bedrooms and a real kitchen. Bennett started breeding and training horses, developing a reputation for quality stock. Amelia managed the household and the books, proving to have a good head for business. They hired a few hands to help with the work, and slowly, steadily, the Irons ranch prospered. In 1891, Amelia received a letter from Samuel, her younger brother. He was 16 now, and he wrote that he wanted to come work for them if they would have him. Their father had died the previous winter from pneumonia, and Samuel wanted to learn ranching from Bennett. Sarah, he wrote, was being cared for by a kind neighbor woman and was doing well. Amelia wrote back immediately, inviting Samuel to come as soon as he could arrange it. When he arrived a month later, thin and worn from the journey but with hope in his eyes, she barely recognized him. But when she hugged him, he was still her little brother, and she was grateful beyond words to have him back in her life. Samuel proved to be a natural with horses, learning quickly under Bennett's patient instruction. He thrived at the ranch, growing strong and confident. A year later, Sarah came to visit, and Amelia was delighted to see how her sister had grown into a lovely young woman. Sarah ended up staying, helping Amelia with the children and the household, and eventually meeting and marrying one of the neighboring ranchers' sons. The Irons family continued to grow. In 1893, Amelia gave birth to twin boys, much to everyone's surprise and Bennett's slight panic. They named them Andrew and Matthew, and they were handfuls from the start, always getting into mischief together. In 1896, another daughter arrived, sweet and calm in temperament, whom they named Margaret after the woman who had given Amelia her first real home after her escape. By the turn of the century, the Irons Ranch was one of the most respected operations in the region. Their horses were sought after throughout Nevada and beyond. Bennett had a crew of good men working for him, including Samuel, who had become his right hand. The children were growing up strong and happy, learning to ride almost before they could walk, working alongside their parents as soon as they were old enough. Amelia sometimes thought back to that night in 1883 when she had run through the streets of Carlin, terrified and desperate. She thought about the moment Bennett had appeared out of the darkness, offering his hand and asking if she was running from something or towards something. She had been running from then, but she had ended up running toward the life she was meant to have. One evening in 1902, they sat together on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the Ruby Mountains in shades of gold and purple. The children were inside, the older ones helping the younger with their schoolwork. Bennett's hair was starting to gray at the temples, and Amelia had laugh lines around her eyes, but they were still the same people who had fallen in love nearly 20 years earlier. "You remember what I said to you the first night we met?" Bennett asked, reaching for her hand. "You said a lot of things that night," Amelia teased. "I told you that you were priceless to me," Bennett said, "because anyone who would sell a person for money didn't understand value." "I remember," Amelia said softly. "I want you to know that I meant it," Bennett said. "And every day since then you've proven it true. You are priceless, Amelia. You're the best thing that ever happened to me. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. You gave me everything." Amelia leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the familiar warmth of him, the solid strength that had been her anchor through all these years. "You saved me," she said. "In every way a person can be saved. I was drowning and you pulled me out. You gave me a life worth living." "We saved each other," Bennett corrected. "I was just drifting before I met you, running from my past and my guilt. You gave me a reason to stop running, to put down roots, to build something lasting." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun slipped below the horizon and the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. Inside the house, they could hear their children's voices, laughing and talking. It was the sound of home, of family, of everything they had built together. "My family sold me for debts," Amelia said quietly, repeating the words she had cried that first night. "They thought I was worth $800. "You're worth everything," Bennett said firmly. "You're worth the world." Amelia turned to kiss him, and the kiss was sweet and familiar, and full of the love they had built over nearly 2 decades together. When they pulled apart, she smiled at him, this man who had appeared out of the darkness to save her, who had become her husband, her partner, the father of her children. "We did all right, didn't we?" she said. "We did better than all right," Bennett said. "We did amazing." And as they sat there together, surrounded by the life they had built, Amelia knew he was right. They had taken the worst circumstances and turned them into something beautiful. They had taken pain and fear and transformed it into love and joy and family. The years continued to roll by, each one bringing its own challenges and triumphs. There were hard winters when they worried about the horses and the cattle. There were dry summers when water was scarce and everyone worked from dawn to dusk just to keep everything going. There were illnesses and injuries, close calls that left them shaken but grateful. But through it all, they had each other, and that made all the difference. In 1905, James, their eldest, married a sweet girl from a neighboring ranch. Amelia cried at the wedding, partly from joy and partly from the bittersweet realization that her babies were growing up. But she was also proud, so proud of the man James had become, strong and kind and hardworking just like his father. Caroline, their first daughter, showed a talent for drawing and painting, capturing the beauty of the Nevada landscape in ways that took Amelia's breath away. She dreamed of going to San Francisco to study art, and Amelia and Bennett encouraged her, even though the thought of her leaving made Amelia's heart ache. The twins, Andrew and Matthew, were inseparable and utterly devoted to the ranch. They talked about expanding the operation, about breeding not just horses but also cattle, about buying more land. Bennett listened to their enthusiastic plans with an indulgent smile, remembering when he had been that young and full of ambition. Little Margaret, the youngest, was the most like Amelia in temperament, thoughtful and observant and fiercely protective of those she loved. She helped Amelia run the household with quiet efficiency, and Amelia knew that wherever life took her daughter, she would be successful. Samuel eventually married as well, to a practical, no-nonsense woman named Esther who fit perfectly into the ranch family. They had 3 children of their own, and Amelia delighted in being an aunt, spoiling her nieces and nephews shamelessly. Sarah and her husband had 4 children, and the Irons Ranch became the gathering place for the extended family, especially during holidays and special occasions. In 1910, Bennett and Amelia celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary. Their children, now mostly grown, organized a party that brought together friends and family from all over the region. It was a warm summer evening, and they set up tables outside, stringing lanterns in the trees. There was music and dancing and more food than anyone could possibly eat. Jack and Margaret Corrigan, now quite elderly but still sharp as tacks, were the guests of honor aside from the couple themselves. As the evening wound down and people started heading home, Bennett took Amelia's hand and led her away from the crowd, toward the spot where they had built their first little cabin all those years ago. It was gone now, replaced by a newer structure that served as housing for some of the ranch hands, but they both remembered exactly where it had stood. 25 years, Bennett said, shaking his head in wonder. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like forever." "The best 25 years of my life," Amelia said. "Every single day with you has been a gift." "Even the hard days?" Bennett asked with a smile. "Especially the hard days," Amelia said. "Because we got through them together. That's what marriage is, isn't it? Not just sharing the good times, but weathering the storms side by side." Bennett pulled her close, and they swayed together to the distant sound of music drifting from the party. "I would do it all again," he said. "Every single moment. I would ride into Carlin on that October night, and I would offer you my hand, and I would fall in love with you all over again." "You're a romantic," Amelia teased, though her eyes were suspiciously bright. "Only for you," Bennett said. "Only ever for you." They stood there together as the stars wheeled overhead, two people who had found each other in the darkness and built a life in the light. They had known loss and pain, but they had also known love and joy in abundance. They had created a family, a home, a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. In the years that followed, they slowed down somewhat, letting their children take on more of the day-to-day running of the ranch. Bennett still worked with the horses, but he left the harder physical labor to younger men. Amelia still managed the household, but she had help now, daughters-in-law and granddaughters who learned from her and carried on her traditions. They became grandparents many times over, and there was nothing Bennett and Amelia loved more than having the grandchildren visit. The house would fill with noise and laughter and chaos, and Amelia would pretend to be exasperated while secretly loving every minute of it. Bennett would take the older children out riding, teaching them what he had taught their parents, passing on his knowledge and his love of the land. In 1918, as the world was emerging from the shadow of the Great War, Bennett became ill. It started as a cough that wouldn't go away, and despite the doctor's best efforts, it developed into pneumonia. He fought hard, but his body, worn down by decades of hard physical labor, couldn't quite win the battle. On a cold January night, surrounded by his family, Bennett Irons passed away peacefully in his sleep. He was 61 years old. Amelia was devastated. Even though she had known this day would come eventually, even though they had been blessed with over 30 years together, losing Bennett felt like losing a part of herself. The man who had saved her, who had loved her, who had built a life with her was gone, but she was not alone. Her children rallied around her, and her grandchildren filled the house with their presence. Samuel, now a gray-haired man himself, took over much of the ranch management, working closely with James and the twins to keep everything running smoothly. And slowly, painfully, Amelia learned to live with the grief, to carry it as a part of her rather than letting it overwhelm her. She lived for another 12 years after Bennett's death, years that she filled with her family and her memories. She told her grandchildren stories about their grandfather, about the night he had rescued her, about the life they had built together. She made sure they knew what kind of man he had been, brave and kind and true, a man who kept his promises and loved deeply. On a warm spring evening in 1930, Amelia Voss Irons passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 68. She was buried beside Bennett on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together, with a view of the Ruby Mountains in the distance. At her funeral, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, the preacher spoke of a life well lived, of a woman who had overcome impossible circumstances to build something beautiful and lasting. James, now a middle-aged man with children of his own, stood to speak about his mother. "My parents had one of the great love stories," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Not because it was easy or perfect, but because they chose each other every single day. My father used to say that my mother was priceless to him, and he spent his whole life proving it. And my mother, who had every reason to be bitter and hard, chose love instead. She chose hope. She chose to build rather than destroy. That's the legacy she leaves us. Not just this ranch, not just this family, but the example of what it means to truly love someone. The Irons Ranch continued to prosper under the management of Amelia and Bennett's descendants. The story of how the ranch began, of the desperate woman running through the night and the cowboy who saved her, became a family legend, told and retold to each new generation. The house that Bennett and Amelia had built was expanded and modernized over the years, but certain things remained unchanged. The view of the mountains, the porch where they had courted, the room where their children had been born. In the decades that followed, as the Old West gave way to the modern world, the Irons family adapted but never forgot their roots. They remembered the love story that had started it all, remembered the courage and the sacrifice, and the hope that had built their legacy. They remembered Bennett Irons, the drifting cowboy who had found his home and his purpose in saving a desperate young woman. And they remembered Amelia Voss, who had been sold for debts, but who had proven herself to be truly priceless. Their story lived on, a testament to the power of kindness, the strength of love, and the possibility of redemption even in the darkest circumstances. It was a story of the Wild West, yes, but more than that. It was a story of two people who found each other when they needed it most, and who built a life together that echoed through generations. And on quiet evenings, when the sun set over the Ruby Mountains and painted the sky in brilliant colors, the descendants of Bennett and Amelia Irons would sometimes stand on the old porch and imagine they could feel the presence of their ancestors, still there, still together, still in love after all these years. The ranch stood as a monument to what they had built, but more importantly, the family stood as a testament to the love they had shared. From that desperate night in October 1883, when a terrified young woman ran through the streets of Corrian, and a cowboy appeared out of the darkness to offer his hand, to the peaceful passing of two people who had lived and loved fully, the story of Bennett and Amelia was one that deserved to be remembered. Not just for the adventure or the drama, but for the simple, powerful truth at its heart, that sometimes, when we think we have lost everything, we are actually on the verge of finding exactly what we need. That sometimes, the darkest moments lead to the brightest futures. And that true love, the kind that sees value where others see only price tags, the kind that offers protection without expectation, the kind that builds slowly and steadily over years of shared life, is worth more than any amount of money ever could be. Bennett and Amelia had proven that love could conquer even the most desperate circumstances. They had shown that two people, armed with nothing but determination and devotion to each other, could build a legacy that would last for generations. They had taken a story that began with tears and fear and transformed it into one of joy and hope and family. And in the end, that was the greatest triumph of all. Not the ranch they built or the fortune they accumulated or even the children they raised, though all of those things mattered. The greatest triumph was the love itself, pure and strong and enduring, a love that had started on a dark October night when a cowboy told a crying woman that she was priceless to him, and then spent the rest of his life proving it true.